Hello everyone and welcome back to another sort of talking video. I know you guys are probably getting fed up of these by now, but seeing as I did one with Mecha about whether or not growths matter, and someone in the comments section whose name is Rengor commented saying that he's doing a 0% growths run after I made that video. And a couple days ago he reached out to me again in the comment section and said, hey, I actually finished the run. So I decided to invite him back and we can make a little follow-up on whether or not growths matter. So here with me is Rengor. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a pleasure to have you because what you're doing is, borderline insane, but also incredible. Which I guess is what I'm going to start with is why do you even subject yourself to this?
I have a better question. Why not subject yourself to this? So, I guess I should start with a little bit of backstory of like how my FE playing goes. So,
Sure.
somewhere along the line, I've become a major part of the DSFE community. So, Shadow Dragon and New Mystery of the Emblem. And specifically for New Mystery of the Emblem, we basically created this subset of playing called the Soyo Draft, which stands for Screw Over Your Opponent, which is to give your opponent like some of the worst units imaginable on Lunatic Reverse and then beat the game with them. So I'm no stranger to doing insane things. And it basically, like, that experience kind of carries over into a 0% growth mindset, because you just start wondering, well, what do I do to increase reliability? What can I rely on?
So you start modeling after consistency more so than anything else in the game, basically.
Yeah, because, and I guess another thing is that my RNG is hilariously bad. Like, my name is Rengor, and people have started calling it the Reng, Rengor number generator. It's that bad, and I just, one day decided, you know what, this isn't working out. I need to minimize RNG as much as possible. And then that inevitably led to 0% growths, which aren't reliable in the slightest, but hey.
Interesting. So I'm just going to give a quick definition for anyone who doesn't know what a 0% growths run is. It's kind of self-explanatory, but basically every single one of your growths is minimized down to 0%. So your characters will level up only in number of level, but they will not gain any stats. But this is a little bit different in Three Houses, right? Because I think
there is a system
if I'm remembering
in play.
correctly.
Okay,
Yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
explain
Explain
how
it.
this
You
works
probably know
exactly.
better than I do.
Yeah, let me explain how this works exactly. So, first of all, there are two subsets of growths. There are personal growths and there are class growths. We can nullify the class. Also, class growths are divided between player class growths and enemy class growths. We leave enemy class growths alone, and this way enemies are just as they were, usually. There is no difference between enemies. Player class growths we nullify to 0. There is no penalty here, just nullify all of them to 0. And then we have the and then we have the personal class growths of all your player units. Now the issue here is that there is actually a hidden mechanic in Three Houses where the regular students, Byleth, Flane, and Cyril are always forced to get 2 stats at minimum, and there is no way to bypass that. Like, you have to gain 2 stats. So the issue here is, since this isn't a new situation, this also happens in Radiant Dawn, which forces 1 stat. So the issue here is, what do we make the dump stats, as in the stats that matter the least? So the answer here was Dexterity and Luck. Now, as to explain why these two in particular, it's mostly because other stats matter way more. If we did Charm, then we are increasing the might of Gambits. 5 Charm equals 1 might on the plus 1 attack on the Gambits. As well, we would maximize our own hit rates and minimize the enemy hit rates at basically no penalty. And I'm fairly certain that going from 80% hit on an enemy Gambit to 20% is slightly broken. As for, of course, and then we have stuff like, resistance, suddenly everyone's a mage tank if we max that out. HP is Y. Strength, magic, obviously no. So, basically it's just a matter of it going down to, those are the 2 least important stats. And if you think about it, all they really do is increase reliability in the first place. Because, even though luck obviously matters way more, I think everyone would agree that it's still like the worst stat. Maybe some people would say dexterity is even worse. So yeah, like it's basically the matter of those are the two least important stats. I have to roll with this. Might as well. I don't know. Call my round invalid if you guys want. I don't care. I'm not gonna cry over that.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to really get rid of the growths here in this case. So I think what you did is definitely fair. And when you explain it and explain the rules ahead of time, like I remember watching one of your videos and I'm like, hang on, that's a level up. And then I went down and I read the description. I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. If it's an internal game mechanic,
I should also explain one thing. If anyone ever wonders, will there ever be a 0% growth patch for this game? No. For one simple reason, you need to be editing these on the fly. If only because, like, there are two things also in play here. So you can recruit students in this game, right? And there is a table of stats which they join. This isn't random. These stats are preset, unless it's Gilbert, because his last level up is actually RNG, believe it or not. Thank you, Insis, very cool. But other students are, like, fixed in their stats. When recruited at a certain chapter, they will always have these stats with these weapon ranks. So I allowed them to gain their usual stats because getting them at lower stats would be a literal impossibility in vanilla. And the point of 0% growths is, like, in my opinion at least, it's that it's the most stat-screwed run in existence, basically. It's like, what if your luck was absolutely horrible and you had to deal with what you have? So I don't want to cause impossibilities. And the more important reason is that enemy students actually pull from their regular growths as player units. So if you notify them from the beginning, the enemy students will have no stats whatsoever. So yeah, that's the other two rules of the 0%. I guess the other mentions is that I didn't use any New Game Plus features, no DLCs, and the patch was done, and it was done on the original Maddening release 1.0.2, just because of hacking reasons.
Okay. I'm assuming the gameplay did not change very much between the patches, right?
The only thing is that attack adjutants are better, but I didn't rely on guard attack adjutants for the damage part anyway, so it didn't change anything.
I mean, so it's still harder for you in general.
Yeah, the patch would have made it easier, if anything, if only slightly.
Which is good, I guess. That just speaks to the validity of it. For anyone wondering, the footage in the background is also going to be from one of the chapters of Rengor's 0% Growths run. I highly encourage you go and check that out. I will leave a link to episode 1 or the playlist or whatever in the description, so definitely go watch that if you guys want to see some hardcore gameplay. Three Houses. It's maddening. It's Blue Lions. So
yep, and I also recommend that if it doesn't have commentary, you just speed it up, and maybe put some of your own music in there. Because one thing is that I really don't edit videos like at all. I just upload them basically if they're not like glitched out or whatever. So you're not really losing anything by just speeding them up. And since this is done on an emulator, the Yuzu emulator, there is considerable slowdown. Like it still runs at like 33 to 50%, which is not bad honestly. But it could have been better. Mm-hmm. I'm at least happy that it can like run both emulating the game and then having to record it with OBS, and then maybe even screen sharing it on Discord with commentating.
It's watchable.
Yeah, it's definitely watchable. But do yourself a favor, and if you feel like you need to, just put it on 2x speed.
Yeah, and I might do that in the video playing in the background. I don't know. At this time, we're just kind of talking. I haven't edited the video yet, so we'll get to it. Mm-hmm. So I just want to backtrack a little bit. When you're planning one of these 0% growths runs, what goes into it? Like at the very start, before you start, what's the first thing you think of? How do you start getting ready for it? Okay, so I guess here is where I mention that this entire run hasn't really been like thought out as much as you might think. This isn't like some meticulous chapter by chapter strategy. The main thing to consider usually for a 0% growths run are like the bottlenecks. So you have to identify the hardest moments in the game and how you're gonna mitigate them. So in the case of Three Houses, that would be the early game. The early game is hard either way, so you just need to have means of dealing with it. Like recruiting Catherine by chapter 5 in order to have her for that chapter and not suffer against the Miklan Black Beast.
The other two considerable bottlenecks will also be Hunting by Daybreak, the first time skip chapter with all the thieves.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that one's terrible with growths. I can only imagine how bad it is with no growth.
Yeah, let's just say modern problems require modern solutions. We'll get to that later. And the other point of contention was endgame. Those three bullet points were basically my main concern, and then everything else I just built on top of that. I just looked at whoever has like the best kids, who I can get some statless utility from, or like just who would contribute in a setting where they just join with their base stats, and I'm left with that. So that's basically the main process of planning a 0% growth run. Some games are easier for it, some games are harder, some games don't even require preparation, like campaign-wise. You just have to plan on a chapter-by-chapter basis. But in this case, you do have to plan a bit into the future, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually under the assumption that you had kind of studied it chapter by chapter and sort of looked at all the units and who's best utility-wise and gone that way, or did you not? I mean, who were your most useful units?
I did look at all the units per se, but there isn't much to look at because not a lot of units have kids that are like persistent throughout growths, and the few that I did use, some of them were just temporary. So sometimes it was a case of, hey, this works. And the other most important thing was planning out what skills I would get them, because if you're not gonna get growths, you might as well get class mastery skills like hit plus 20, death blow. You can imagine how useful death blow is in a setting where you can't level up stats. So it's basically just that, like getting your units, getting their basic path planned out, like as a unit, basic, nothing too major, and then getting the appropriate class mastery skills.
And so at the end of the game, I know you mentioned to me in private that Dimitri was probably your strongest unit, but aside from Dimitri and Byleth, because those are the two forced ones, who did you find were your most useful units?
Well, Byleth actually wasn't that useful past chapter 14, really. She kind of fell off in a way because there was no reason to keep her running. Dimitri I only really kept running because of his combination of Battalion Wrath, Battalion Vantage. So I pumped all of my stat boosters into him, like all of the strength boosters that I've been using the gardening for. I've been basically exclusively growing strength boosters as well, so he ended up the run with 48 strength, just off of stat boosters alone, and basically no one else got anything else. As for who the other useful units were, well, I actually, ironically enough, made a tier list. I'm gonna post it in the Discord just for posterity's sake. However, I can say right now that the other king of the game was basically Sedef, as Dmitri was a enemy phase based unit with Battalion Wrath, Battalion Vantage, Retribution, and then also he became the dancer for Soda Void plus 20 just so I would survive Hunting by Daybreak. Sedef was the other most important unit because while Dmitri was the enemy phase, Sedef was the player phase. He was the unit to go the furthest, to use Swift Strikes in order to eliminate key targets due to his good bases, and Flame giving him +3 attack. Death Blow, hit plus 20, good Keyhole Wyvern Core basically. And a lot of the late game chapters ended up being done in a basically LTC setting, because the longer you stay, the less likely you are to win, because you just can't really outstat enemies, so you're just looking for ways to not have to deal with inflation.
And I assume that's where Lysithea comes in as well, on that tier list up there. And I assume that's also where Lysithea comes in, being at the top of the tier list there?
Lysithea, yeah. Lysithea, well, ironically enough, I actually recruited her chapter 6, so she had 19 base magic as a mage. And ironically enough, I know the meme is that Lysithea one-shots things, but she actually did one-shot things a lot. If you look at the 0%, which is hilarious to me. Mm-hmm. She ended the run at 32 magic. Her main utility was warp through her massive range, but the offensive prowess was also there. The other unit you can see up there is Shamir, and that's just Hunter's Volley, Death Blow, and just Hunter's Volley. That's it, basically.
Listen, no matter what kind of skills she has and what kind of stats she has, Shamir is always S tier, okay? That's the rule.
Well,
Doesn't
you can
matter.
see. Well, she is the third best unit of the run, I would say. Like
Nice.
only
That's what I like
behind
to
the
hear.
enemy face god and the player face god himself.
And Annette's an interesting one up there. Is that just Rally Bot?
And that was interesting. So, Annette has to be like one of the most unique units here because she had a really good early game actually. Early game combat with Wind, Cutting Gale against armors, for example, doubling even, or KOing Chapter 5 armors instantly. But her main thing was that she gets Rally Strength as a personal, Rally Resistance at D, which is, well, not as useful, but it is useful, Rally Speed at C+. And that's, you would think where that would just end, right? You have C+, you have Rally Speed, you're good to go. However, Blue Lions, specifically, gets access to Blue Lion Dancers, an A-rank battalion with Dance of the Goddess, and I need a unit capable of using them. And it just turns out that Annette is the best unit in the game for handling these, due to her early join and the fact that you're rushing her to C+ authority either way. And she doesn't need stats to do what she does, so I just made her a Cavalier, like a level 10 Cavalier, gave her Blue Lion Dancers, and set her just to be a rally bot and to use Dance of the Goddess.
Interesting. And let me take a stab at this last one here. I'm assuming Eloise is because you can just reclass him into Wyvern immediately, and he's got a massive
Ironically
HP pool.
enough, he never did become a Wyvern in the entire run. He stuck to Warrior and War Master, basically. What he did was get Vantage through Mercenary, Wrath through his innate Warrior class, and then just abuse his high bases on top of... He also has Battalion Wrath at base, so he has Vantage, Wrath, and Battalion Wrath, which is Vantage with innate 100% crit. And then he also abuses his high strength stat innately, Leone attack support, where her support rank also gives him damage. And with that combined, and just a high might of axes, he ended up being basically think of him as a lesser Dimitri and a lesser Sedev. Also, that high axe rank did come in handy, for example, for using the axe of Konvasara, the A rank axe that is effective against armors, for example, the Chapter 15 Great Knight boss. So it's a combination of high axe rank, high bases, and access to Vantage Wrath, Battalion Wrath.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't think those would be the main tactics with this, but it seems like it was. You touched a little bit on the farming and that you were exclusively farming strength and it all went into Dimitri. I'm going to play a little bit of a hard ass here, but if you were not doing the farming, do you think this is still doable? And is it just doable but very tedious?
I would need to find a different strategy for the final boss. However, it would be possible because, okay, let's just imagine that we are allowing some gardening. Let's be real, 75% chance is gonna happen eventually, but because that's the chance of you getting strength with optimal farming. But if we got way less, then whatever Dimitri did could have been replicated by Aloe. So that it would be possible. However, again, there is a reason. There is a cutoff we must make. When something has a 75% chance of working, and you can influence it by you can restart obviously, but overall, gardening is an important part of free houses in general, and just keeping up with enemy bulk basically does require you to use it, even in normal play. Honestly, even in normal play, you want to be stacking strength or magic or speed on a 1 or 2 different units just so they would keep up to the inflation. So that's basically my stance on that matter.
Fair enough. Oh yes. So the other thing I wanted to ask that also revolves around stats, because I thought it was so interesting that you only optimized strength. Would you say, after you have gone through this, that strength is actually, or / magic, is the most important stat in maddening mode for 3 houses, or do you think it would be something like speed, defense, and resistance?
I thought that even as I was playing with growths, because speed eventually, unless you're a unit that is innately really fast, and you can stack speed to reach the thresholds of doubling, speed is basically a dump stat. You just want damage, raw damage. So strength and magic. Though strength is more useful of the two, I would feel, because mages are pretty movement limited, and even like Dark Knight, like horse classes aren't ideal compared to flyers, obviously.
Yep.
So yeah, strength is basically the most important stat in the game. And I think even the devs realized this because the strength food booster is the most costly one in the entire game at 2,500 compared to like everything else being 1,000 at most. So even the devs know. I did say this in the comments of the previous video, but this game really heavily follows the Shadows of Valentia enemy stat model, which is that stats are very heavily tiered. There are low stats, medium stats, and the high stats. So what you want to be doing with speed is that you basically have no hope of doubling the fast enemies. Just give up, basically. But you want to be doubling, if your speedsters want to be doubling the middle speed tier. And then, like, your middle speed tier wants to be at least doubling the low speed tier. And maybe avoid being doubled by the mid speed tier. It's kind of weird how it works, but like it's basically a system of checks with classes. Like, you want mages to preferably double armor knights and then aura kill them. And then for example, Ingrid wants to double enemy mages herself so that she can, for example, retribution with Lewin, and then abuse her high resistance to not take major damage even should she get hit.
I see. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought initially when I was looking at the game and looking at Maddening mode stats. It seems like at a certain point they just get way too high. You're never going to double them no matter what. So, like you said, yeah, it ends up classifying into tiers, which is interesting. So we talked about stats, we talked about units, we touched a little bit on skills, but I want to dive a little bit further into skills. You said death blow, and then you also said
hit plus 20.
Yeah, hit plus 20. What about sort of the individual attack plus 2, speed plus 2, defense plus 2? Did you find any use out of those early ones? Did you find yourself going down any of the early ones specifically to get one of those?
I did find use out of strength plus 2 because, again, strength just lasts you the whole game. Magic plus 2 was really useful on casters, obviously, because it also extends warp range in addition to adding attack. So it was basically on all three of my warpers, which are, Linhard, Manuela, Lysithia. It ended up on all three of them. Speed plus 2 I did put on Byleth and Dimitri, but it was sort of a mistake on my part, I guess. It didn't end up being all that useful because speed just turns out to be such a dump stat that you don't really care. And then defense plus 2 didn't really have a place other than on the Dew, who used it early game to stack defense to some really high levels, admittedly, before he fell off. And then also gave him repositioned, which came in useful for one map exactly, which is chapter 16, just to reposition Manuela to be able to warp. So, like, of the beginner classes, I would say fighter is by far the best one, just because strength plus 2 has more applications than speed plus 2. But depending on the unit, speed plus 2 can be also really useful early game. Like in Groves, Byleth can use it to potentially reach doubling thresholds. So that is something to consider. Reposition is good and all, but I don't like the soldier class. It has a bad modifier. It's only +1 dex compared to +1 strength or +1 speed, which are way more useful early game. And defense plus 2 is just not as good. But reposition is nice, I will admit.
Alright, and what about combat arts? I know you mentioned Hunter's Volley. Is that basically the
obviously we have all the brave arts. We have Hunter's Volley, we have Point Blank Volley, which is why Cyril, if you look at the tier list I sent you, is at S-. That is purely because he has Point Blank Volley at S-, and it just allows him to get up in viability with like Death Blow, Strength plus 2, Steel Bow plus, and then he goes into Wyvern, reaps the Wyvern bases, and then just flies around as a Wyvern. We have, Swift Strikes, the God skill. We have, of the other combat arts, we have obviously like the basic ones. We have Tempest Lance, we have Nightmiller, we have Wrath Strike, Curved Shot. The basic ones, but the ones that are just really good in general. Other than
I'm assuming
that,
those are more used early game, right? Or did they last you all the way through?
they actually do last. Well, the basic ones don't last as much. Curved Shot does have some utility for hit rate, but other ones... Well, Tempest Lance also has utility because it's plus 8 damage, and if you're not going to be doubling anyway, it's just 3 plus 8. So they are useful throughout like the game, but not obviously stop being as useful compared to Hunter's Volley, Swift Strikes, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there is also a special mention to Helm Splitter as well for dealing effective damage to Armor Knights. That one was also useful. But yeah, other than that, the combat arts, like other than basic ones, you don't really need more of them.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Although
I guess
growths, this can change, and you should just look at the combat arts and determine whether or not you want them. Like I did get Soul Blade on Lysithia eventually, just because I had nothing else to train, and she could actually like one-shot Armor Knights with an Armor Slayer with it, when she couldn't with a magic spell anymore.
Interesting.
So that is something to consider. But overall, like just consider what they are, consider whether you want to get them, and if you can get them easily, just get them. If you can't get them easily, don't bother. Unless it's something really good like Swift Strikes, then get them at all costs. And then, like, the basic ones suffice, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds fairly reasonable. I mean, we look at Night Kneeler and we look at Helm Splitter. Those are anti-class, and so you would expect those to kind of go a long way, either early or late game.
Yeah, also, obviously Night Kneeler, they're also accurate somewhat, and they're accurate, they do damage, and they just go a long way.
Here's a question I bet a lot of people are going to want to hear. Did you let Lysithia one-shot the Death Knight?
Actually, no. In none of these chapters did she one-shot the Death Knight. See, like...
You didn't play
okay,
the memes.
I guess I can make it a tangent about Lysithia, because I actually do have a bit of a strong opinion about her. I think that she is extremely good, but people are both overrating her and underrating her. So they are overrating her in the fact that she like does everything, and no, a squishy unit cannot do everything. People stop trying. But she is also underrated in the sense that yes, she is the nuke. Yes, she is the warper, so she has priority on all magic boosters because more magic equals more warp range equals more options equals just better playing experience. And so she just gets up to this level where she can actually reasonably one-shot most stuff. And then her kit also packs utility. Like, for example, Seraphim can break a barrier, like a full barrier, and stun the monster for the next round of combat, opening a window for you to pummel on it. Then, obviously, we have, Dark Spikes, which, well, people just meme it as the Death Knight killing machine. It's more useful for the fact that it's just a really strong spell in general, and it can deal effective damage against other horses, so you're gonna be doing that. And then Hades is powerful, Abraxas is powerful, and like you can work around. Like she has very severe drawbacks, but Free Houses is a game for specialist units. Like this is also like why Lorenz is kind of mediocre, just because he tries to be a master of both physical and magical and ends up doing neither of them really well.
Now, don't let Chaz hear
until
you say
trained
that.
up, really. And then, like, when you're trained up, you can make a lot of things work in the first place, like Draconite Ubello in FE12, for example, which is something I did. But, like, from base, it's just usually not worth it to invest into him. Well, Lysithia is more specialized, but that specialization is exactly why she is good.
I see. Yeah, I mean...
also, because you asked about one-shotting the Death Knight, Shamir actually did it in the first chapter. She is available in chapter 6, which she only needs a +2 attack battalion in order to do at base stats. That's how good she is.
That's interesting. Did she have to crit to do that?
Or no. It's with the Lance of Ruin. You use Night Kneeler with the Lance of Ruin.
Ah, yes.
And then either Rally Strength or a +2 attack battalion is just enough to finish it.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so I totally forgot what I was gonna say. But are you planning on doing any other routes at all?
Not for now. I am tired after the run, after all, and I'm still stuck in the mindset of Azure Moon, and since the early game is so similar, but does need to be handled pretty differently on other routes. I would need to get a reset on the game in my mind, just so I would stop thinking in the terms of Azure Moon and open to other options, because that was important, like being open to other options. For example, I need to mention this because I had Shamir kill the Death Knight in Chapter 6, mostly as a meme. I didn't need to do it, I just did it as a meme. Well, it turned out it wasn't so much of a meme in the first place, because Lorenz in Chapter 7 ended up contributing as a recruit just because of Heartseeker from Dark Mage. So you just need to be constantly looking out for options that you can do. The sooner you catch them, the better, obviously, but you can catch them at last second and still make use of them.
I see. That's very interesting.
So that's important. And if I'm stuck in thinking in Azure Moon mode, then I'm not going to be able to catch those chances. And maybe break the run, potentially.
I see. What do you think is going to make the other ones so different? What's like the most standout one for you?
Well, first of all, Blue Lions has like an insane amount of battalion utility in form of like another stride battalion at D rank, Retribution at D rank, Sacred Shield, which is unique to them, Blue Lion Dancers, which other routes cannot get until very late game, which would make some earlier clears way different, because Dance of the Goddess was used a lot this run. Then obviously there is the matter of unit distribution. For example, the fact that I had Dimitri do the Raf Vantage build with battalion skills. I don't have access to that on other routes, so I would need to rearrange plans for it.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is the matter of like, how do you get by hunting by daybreak, which in Azure Moon, since Dimitri is footlocked, I needed to have him be a dancer to stack his avoid so high that he could actually survive. On something like Golden Deer, I could probably just do it with a fly skip with Claude and Dancer Marianne specifically. But then I would also need to raise up a level 1 Lysithia to level 20 in order to get Bishop, in order to get Warp, in order to warp Marianne, and you see where this is going. It's all a chain effect of small changes that end up making huge differences. Mm-hmm. And as for why I did Azure Moon, it's actually just because I asked my friends which route they wanted me to do, and I just did, and they said Azure Moon, so I just was like, sure, why not?
That's fair.
It ended up being the easiest, I think. So
okay.
If you want True Hell, if anyone wants to do True Hell, you're all free to do Church 0%, because that's gonna be hell.
I was gonna say, have fun doing the final chapter of the church route.
Yeah. How about I get you? Yeah. How about I get back to you on that in like 5,000 years?
Do you think it's not possible?
You can probably handle it, but like it just seems annoying, especially so since Silver Snow in general just has -1 deployment compared to the other two similar routes in Azure Moon and Golden Deer, because, you know, let's remove your lord, but let's not give you a replacement deployment slot because, I don't know.
You know, I actually didn't notice that. I had no idea.
Yeah, you just have one less deployment for your entire game until end game. Like, that's just how it is, and you have to roll with it.
Interesting. I never noticed that. I played Church Route first, so maybe that's why.
Wait, why do I have one more unit slot?
I never noticed that. Wow. Oh, you learn something every day.
You really do.
I remembered what I was going to ask you that I totally forgot about, because you were going on about Lysithia. I don't know if you've seen any of my classes videos that I've made, but I guess I've become a little bit notorious for hating on hating on Mortal Savant and criticizing Gremory. Having said that, I can see extreme utility for something like Gremory in 0% growths.
Yeah, that ended up being Lysithia's class in the end. As for whether Gremory is good, I would say that Lysithia definitely benefits from the class the most. Like, she is definitely the Gremory unit. As for other ones, honestly, you can usually get by with like either Warlock, Bishop, or Dark Knight. Mm-hmm. Never go Holy Knight.
I agree.
But yeah, like, Lysithia definitely gets by far the most out of it. And other units can probably just get by with like Warlock, Bishop, and Dark Knight again. Mortal Savant is still a meme. So yeah. Like, Lysithia by far gets the most out of it, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, when I think of it from normal play, you generally would not need the double uses, But I feel like in
Even then, double warps on a 5-move unit. Like, it's an improvement over Bishop since it's +1 movement, and it's an improvement over, like, Dark Knight because you have 2 warp uses instead of 1. And warp is, insanely powerful even when not warp skipping maps, because it just allows you to have so much utility over the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, my main argument is if you're playing normally, do you really need that 1 extra warp? I guess maybe not.
You also get 2 extra Luna uses, 3 extra Dark Spikes uses, and 2 extra Hades uses.
I've never found myself needing them. That's the thing. It's like
it depends on how the chapters go, but like Dark Spikes turn out to be a really good spell just because they're accurate and they're powerful.
Yep.
And the advantage of Dark Knight is +2 attack. And obviously the movement, but honestly, you can really compensate for it. And another thing, that's another very important thing, is that training Grammarly Sifia just allows her to focus into reason, faith, and authority, without needing to spend any points elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it just focuses her training down, and she may even get like Dark Magic range +1, White Magic range +1, etc. Especially since she also likes getting A authority for Mak'Will Evil Repelling Core, which gives +7 magic attack +30 hit when equipped. And Lysithia struggles with hit a bit, so it is nice. It's basically the most lazy option, but also a really good one.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being a thing for 0% growths, for sure.
No, not even for 0%, I mean like in general play, just because if you can focus on just 3 things rather than needing to also train riding and lances, and since magical riding classes don't exist until final tier, you're gonna have to do it manually, so you'll be detracting from training other things. So it's basically like the most accessible option for her by far.
That's fair. Yeah.
Like accessible, like I feel like a lot of the class debates are also hindered by the fact that people don't really consider how available classes are. Like, for example, Falcon Knight is outclassed by Wyvern Lord, yes, but someone like Byleth would very much prefer going Falcon Knight over Wyvern Lord, just because it is way easier to get only the Lance rank and the Flying rank, which also requires lesser level at B+ rather than A of Wyvern Lord. So you can promote into it way easier than into Wyvern Lord. Same with, for example, Ingrid. Although if you're going Wyvern with her, you can probably certify into Wyvern Lord. But like, availability is also something people need to consider when considering classes. Obviously, some classes are like just set in stone. Like, for example, I think Bow Knight is extremely overrated. Unless it's on someone like Leone or Dimitri, have ways of going around the limitations of Bow Knight. Because while range the range in general is useful, and the movement, of course, Hunter's Volley is just such a stat-immune thing that it's not worth giving up for most units. Like Bernadetta, well, Ash can probably go Wyvern, but like Ignatz, they would much rather stay in Sniper rather than go Bow Knight, just to make up for the damage output.
Yeah.
And obviously Shamir just wants to stay Sniper because, hey, earliest Hunter's Volley in the game. Easy.
Man, I sent my Shamir down almost every single class route. She's just, for me, I always say if you love a unit enough, they will output for you. And I just give my Shamir so much love that no matter what class she's in, she just rocks it. So...
I know the feeling all too well after the new mystery runs.
Yeah. So, I don't really have much else to talk about. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about from what I covered and asked you? Is there anything that you think I missed that you think is important to talk about in terms of 0% growths?
Let's see. Well, we talked about like how stuff usually works. I don't know. Nothing really comes to mind other than like the mindset, which I went into the run because in one of my description, in the run rules description, I said that this is not an LTC run, and then late game chapters are basically all LTC. So I guess I can just really quickly talk about how being versatile in general just works to your advantage. Sure. Because when people think of LTC, they just think like entire game is done as fast as possible, and that is really restrictive to your units, I will admit. However, if you're just going Turtle, then you're eventually going to have to deal with some really high enemy inflation. So, keeping LTC at the back of your mind as an option, as an out to a chapter, is really good. It's not something you should probably do an entire game of, unless you're specifically doing an LTC run. However, it is an extremely good way to just clear chapters. if you need to, if the map allows for it, and if it's not going to hinder your units too much, then you can just skip a map completely. Like if it's a really bad map, like for example, I've been theorizing a LTC of Hunting by Daybreak with really minimal combat, just so people don't like run into major issues that chapter when they're like, guess I'll die. These enemies are really dumb. I hate that chapter, by the way.
Yeah, it's the worst. When I had trouble with that one, playing it on hard classic in my Let's Play. Like, I was just so taken aback by it. I was also playing Church Route, so that didn't help. But I was just so taken aback by it. I was like, why did they do this to you? So,
why not? It's themes.
Yep.
My themes. Even though even Kaga isn't that dumb.
Yeah, I mean, we could dedicate an entire video talking about that, but
I am on the Berwick Saga translation team, so I do know what I'm talking about here. So yeah, not even Kaga would do something like this to you, but Incis is like, hey, have fun or not.
Yep, pretty much. That was not fun.
Yeah, so I guess that's mostly it. What I was talking about, just like being versatile. I think that's like my number one advice to anyone like trying to play Fire Emblem efficiently, which is what I like to call it, like efficiency. It's just be versatile. Be versatile in what you can do. Be versatile in what options you apply. Don't hoard. Yeah, just use your resources. Use your planning to get out of situations, and you'll be fine. That's mostly their lesson of the day.
Yeah, and I assume there's a lot of people who just recently got into Fire Emblem with Three Houses and are sort of barely just testing the waters. You know, maybe they started on casual mode, they're slowly getting into classic. They don't really know the extent of challenge runs, and I think this might be one of the most challenging things out there. It's also not accessible in the normal game, so not everyone can do it. You have to hack the game or play it on an emulator to really get that working. But I would personally encourage people to try out challenge runs. Maybe don't go as hardcore as this. Maybe try an LTC or something like that, which is also a challenge in its own.
I don't know about LTCing. Depends on the game, but definitely not. Never. Don't try on Three Houses LTC.
Why is that?
Okay, if it's hard mode, then it's manageable, but it's still annoying to do because it involves a lot of monastery stuff, which is just fluff. You need to be like reading instructions in order to reach Faith rank on Lysithia, for example. Which is
I see.
really annoying. Just resetting over and over until it works. It's like, hey, guess I'll die again. If you want to do a challenge, if you want to do a challenge run, then honestly, just playing the other games and going higher and higher on the difficulty levels. Unless it's like Awakening Lunatic Plus, which is the only one I really avoid. It's honestly gonna be fine for you to learn things. Just because like certain games are easier, certain games are harder. Then there is New Mystery, which is the hardest game in the franchise, so you're always going to hit some sort of a ceiling, some sort of hurdle for you to overcome. And then once you're good enough to like clear FE12 Lunatic Reverse, then you can like start thinking about, oh, maybe I'll do like Three Houses Maddening 0%. Like that's when, and until then you just basically can cruise by just playing the rest of the series, which is my favorite series of all time, so hey. Don't just play Three Houses, play the other ones too.
So, yep, I agree. I always encourage people, just because I love this series so much, there's so much for everyone to get out of it. Go in and experiment. Find other games. Find things you like, whether it be the story, whether it be the gameplay.
Find hacks. This series has a really widespread hacking community. The hack quality is like varied, but they exist, and they can be nice and then can be nice at times.
Oh, I agree. I remember a period in time when Fire Emblem was like almost dead before Awakening. Between Shadow Dragon and Awakening, we had like a sort of a dead period in the Fire Emblem community, and the hacking community is what really kept me engaged in Fire Emblem and kept me tied there. That saved me, to be honest, because I needed more, and the hacking community was there to provide it.
Yeah.
But we can go on tangents.
Can I give a shout out to two hacks of particular note?
Yeah, go for it.
For people who are into those. So the first hack is The Last Promise. This is the original, basically the OG of Fire Emblem hacks. Like this basically like is the foundation for all of them. It's really old, but it still holds up. It's more like a regular Fire Emblem game with all its ups and downs, but it's really good. And then another hack, which isn't complete yet, mind you, but it is heavily worked on, is Souls of the Forest, which recreates more the DSFE style of play with multiple difficulties, the intended difficulty being Lunatic Reverse even, multiple like difficulty selections, which is like fixed mode, even minimal growths, 0% if you're going to try that. So it's a thing with a built-in 0% growth run for you to enjoy. And it's heavily play-tested too, so it's very challenging, but very fair to the player. So if you want to like try a challenge run, you can try Souls of the Forest on Lunatic and go from there. It's a good introduction to higher levels of challenge, like Shadow Dragon Merciless or New Mystery of Lunatic.
Fantastic. I actually have not heard of that second one, so I will probably have to pick that up at some point and give it a try. I have played The Last Promise. I actually used to play The Last Promise back when it was still in production. Every time Blazor would create a new chapter or two and upload a patch, I would immediately get on that. I was huge into that at that point back then. So yeah, Last Promise is I feel like that one's a classic at this point. Like,
that one's a classic and it's good. Even I would even argue the plot has its really good good moments. It obviously has its bad moments, but it has its good moments too. It's like a Fire Emblem game, as I said.
It
Ups,
is, yeah.
Downs, but overall really good.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I played it twice. I enjoyed it so much. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't think we were going to be talking about ROM hacks here, but there you go, guys. That's something extra if you stuck to the end and you're still listening. Here's a couple ROM hacks that are very good that you can experience. So I'm just looking at the time here. We're almost hitting 50 minutes, and we're really starting to ramble now. We can go on and on forever, I think, talking about Fire Emblem and gushing about Fire Emblem. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to wrap up here. I want to say thank you very much, Rengor, for reaching out to me twice to point out the 0% growth runs. I haven't seen it all, but what I have seen from it has been excellent, and I encourage anyone who's watching to go to the links in the description and go and, at least look at it and see what it looks like. Even if you're not convinced that it's totally your thing, give it a shot and show your support to Rengor. And once again, thanks for joining me, Rengor.
No problem, and thanks for having me here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that, I'm going to wrap up here, and we will see you guys in the next video. Peace.